The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to those expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the OSIP Foundation Incorporated or any other group or individual. This podcast may contain dialogue or subject material that could be considered for mature audiences only. All aspects of How You Play the Game and the OSIP Foundation Incorporated are protected by copyright and other state and federal intellectual property laws. Unauthorized use without the express written consent of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated is strictly prohibited. If you're interested in sponsoring How You Play the Game, please email us at podcast@osipfoundation.org. Your sponsorship may be tax deductible. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of How You Play the Game, the official podcast of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, with you as we talk to you about what's going on as far as the world of sportsmanship is concerned. This is the second episode of the month of March. The year is 2025. Glad you can be with us. As always, check us out online at osipfoundation.org. If you'd like to contact the show, you can use the email address podcast@osipfoundation.org. On social media, we're at facebook.com/OSIPFoundation. X and Instagram are both at OSIPFoundation, hashtag How You Play the Game. So I'm back from a 2-week break in Florida, saw a lot of great baseball. It was a wonderful trip. Got to swim with dolphins, too. Oh, I highly recommend. And I was skeptical. The only really bad part was having to get up in the morning. I will never endorse that as far as I know. But anyway, while I was in Florida, it was like this cacophony of change. You know, you touch down in Florida, you go to bed, and the next morning you wake up and you're like, what the hell just happened? In the 2 weeks that I was down there, the Yankees allowed facial hair all of a sudden. They're going to not play New York at the end of losing ball games. They're going to James Bond is no longer in the control of the Broccoli's and Eon Productions. It's now with Amazon. And Kathleen Kennedy's going to leave Star Wars. You can imagine, like, I was like, did I go through a portal or something? I mean, should I start drinking earlier in the day? I mean, that's the kind of trip it was. But I wanted to focus. We're going to focus on this episode on one thing here, and then when Sean joins me at the next episode, we're going to focus on something else. In this episode, I want to talk about the Yankees changing their facial hair policy, okay? Because there was a lot of mixed reaction to this. And there's some really interesting connections to sportsmanship here, because the parallels are really, really similar when it comes to how one respects the facial hair policy versus how one operates in a competitive environment. So if you didn't know, let me give you some background first, okay? So the New York Yankees appearance policy began in 1976, okay? George Steinbrenner owned the team, and he believed that he needed to regulate the player's appearance in order to instill a sense of discipline. Okay, so he took over in 73, and then he started, taking notes and whatnot, and then he put it in 3 years later. And it actually remained in place after his death, too. There were a lot of different incidents, such as with Oscar Gamble and Don Mattingly, throughout the years. And the facial hair policy essentially says you're not allowed to have any facial hair below the lip. So you're allowed to have a mustache. That's fine. Certain lengths of sideburns were considered okay. And but there's no long hair. There's no beards, anything like that. Okay. And certain players would balk at it at different times. There are players who refuse to come to the Yankees because of it. There are players who critiqued the policy after leaving the Yankees. There was a lot of different stuff that happened during the tenure of this policy. Okay. It says here, in terms of the terms of the Yankees appearance policy were codified in 1976. Okay, it was called the Neatness Counts policy. It was introduced by Steinbrenner and manager Billy Martin, and it specified no beards, no beads, no mutton chops, no long hair, no long stirrups. And the policy has since been amended to read, all players, coaches, and male executives are forbidden to display any facial hair other than mustaches except for religious reasons, and scalp hair may not be grown below the collar. Long sideburns and mutton chops are not specifically banned. Okay? Steinbrenner argued in 78 that the policy was not specifically about distaste, but more about trying to instill a certain sense of order and discipline. All right, so that's what we have here, and a lot of different people, kind of had to adapt as a result of it. People who when they came to the Yankees would have to shave, they'd have to cut their hair. There were a lot of different issues that came up. So if I'm kind of reading some of these here, let's see here. In April 1977, Doc Ellis was traded to the Oakland Athletics after he wore an earring while on the pitcher's mound. He did not conform to Steinbrenner standards. Goose Gossage was reminded, and he shaved only the chin of his beard and created an exaggerated mustache. Lou Piniella, meanwhile, once challenged the rule during spring training by citing that Jesus had long hair. And Steinbrenner, of course, responded by saying, if you can walk on water, you can wear your hair any way you want. I thought that was a pretty good one. In 1991, Don Mattingly was fined and removed from the starting lineup for refusing to cut his hair. Let's see here. Those are kind of the big things and whatnot. And then you had a lot of criticisms of it. So, for example, people started saying it was outdated. In 2013, General Manager Brian Cashman attempted to acquire relief pitcher Brian Wilson in free agency, but the negotiations halted because Wilson refused to shave his signature beard. David Price said he would not want to sign with the Yankees because of their appearance policy. Justin Turner and Charlie Blackmon were cited as players that would not shave their beards. Then let's see. Well, we had Andrew McCutchen criticized it after he left. Clint Frazier joked about it. Said said his curly red hair was declared a distraction. Then manager Joe Girardi said in 2017 that, quote, I haven't really had anyone come into my office and say we need to change this. And then a couple of weeks ago, you had Hal Steinbrenner come out and said we're going to now amend it and permit players and coaches to have, quote, well-groomed beards. Okay? And Hal Steinbrenner cited several years of internal dialogue culminating in conversations with players, both former and current, and a bunch of other people. And one of the kind of tipping points here was the Yankees acquired Devin Williams, the closer from the Brewers, and he had worn a beard his entire professional career. And Williams voiced his frustrations to Brian Cashman about the inconsistent application of a policy that allowed mustaches but not beard stubble. So you can see where this is kind of going, okay? And if you kind of do like a general overview, you're going to see a lot of the same stuff here in in any sort of internet search and whatnot. And I think the big thing here that I wanted to say, it starts with the fact that change is tough. A lot of people, in my circle, a lot of people on social media, etc. They started criticizing this change right away. They're not used to change, and I think we all have a part of ourselves where we're not used to change. I definitely was like, oh, geez, I'm not going to be used to this, seeing Yankees with facial hair. It's just not something that I care to see. But at the same time, I kind of pumped the brakes a little bit, and I said, all right, well, look, you got to give it a little bit of time. They can always rescind it if it's going to be that big of a deal. But I just kind of wanted to wait and see how I felt. And I started seeing it and whatnot, and I was just like, yeah, not used to it. Not particularly a fan of it. I kind of prefer the clean-shaven look like that. And as I was kind of going over the feelings that I had and talking about how change is tough for a lot of people, and you read some of these comments from people and you're just like, okay, guys, we don't need to scorch the earth over this. I get it. You don't like it. Okay. I understand, but the world is not going to end because the Yankees changed this facial hair policy. Believe me, I'm not a fan of the amendment to this, But I think I can kind of put it in perspective a little bit and say, life will go on. Does it remove some of the mystique of the Yankees? Yeah, it does. It does, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of it. But to kind of sum it up, I went and I looked at some of the quotes that Captain Aaron Judge said. And I feel like what he said when he was asked about all of this stuff sums everything up, okay? First, he joked about how he does not plan on growing any facial hair with the change. And he did also say that he was shocked about the announcement. He did give, did say that he was asked about it from the higher ups. Garrett Cole, Giancarlo Stanton were part of those talks, etc. Judge, who is very close with Hal Steinbrenner, just did not feel as strongly about the facial hair policy. And this quote said it best. One of the reasons I adore Aaron Judge. You ready for this? He says, quote, "If that little rule is going to stop you from coming here, then you probably shouldn't be here." End quote. How about that? That's sportsmanship right there, okay? And the reason that I say that that's good sportsmanship is because Judge put everything into perspective here. This is the equivalent of saying the most important thing here is the W, okay? Your individual stats don't matter. Whether the team wins is what matters, okay? That's where it's at, guys, okay? And he goes on to say, if a little rule like that's going to stop you from doing your job, then I don't know. I haven't heard too much about it stopping guys from coming here, but Hal dug in a little more on that than I did. That's all what Aaron Judge said. Judge added he's never really gotten the sense that players didn't want to join the Yankees because of the rule, but he also said it was tough to say. Devin Williams then said, "Yeah, I would consider it for sure if that's the case regarding the beard and whatnot." And Williams went on to say, quote, "That's my preferred look," meaning the beard. "That's how I feel most comfortable for myself. I can't really speak for other people, but I know that's how I'm most comfortable." And Aaron Judge continued by saying, quote, "If this is something that's going to stop us from winning games or stop us from getting a player or stop a certain guy from not performing their best, why would we put that in the way of what our ultimate goal is?" So that ultimately was the big decision maker right there. But Judge went on to say, quote, "This is what I know. This is what I'm used to. When I look around the building and look at old photos of the past legends and people that played here, they all followed that rule. So I just tried to follow their path. But I didn't really think it was that big of a deal until it really got brought up these past couple of weeks. I think the rule will be good. I think it'll help a lot of guys. And if it gets us a couple more players and will help us win games, I think everybody will be on board for that." You know what? Great. Because that right there, it all sums up Aaron Judge. He's saying, if it's going to help us, great, all for it. But at the same time, if that's that big of a deal, then maybe you don't belong here. And I just want to praise Aaron Judge for that. And he kind of rounded out his quotes by saying, quote, "That's one thing I learned all the way from the minor leagues up. You have those certain rules that teach you discipline, teach you a certain way. And that was my big concern. I didn't want a lot of these rules to start changing. A lot of these separate us and make the New York Yankees a standard. I understand the facial hair policy, but let's keep a lot of these other things in check." What else can you say? What else can you say? I think that's kind of all you need to know here. So as we scratch our heads at this change in the Yankee facial hair policy, I think the big thing here is to kind of look to the captain. And again, I'm not one for putting people on pedestals because they're bound to disappoint us. But I do have to tip my cap to Aaron Judge for this, because I think he said it very eloquently. Look, if it's going to help us get a player, if it's going to help us win and whatnot, that's fine. But at the same time, if that little thing is going to prevent you from doing your job and from wanting to be here, then maybe you don't belong here. I think that's beautiful. And here's the other thing too, I'll wrap with this. By the captain saying that, he kind of fired a message to everyone who was in that room wearing the pinstripes, saying, if your big concern is facial hair, time to rethink things because your big concern needs to be the team winning. It's that simple. It's that simple. So kudos to you, Aaron Judge. I really appreciate what you said because it sums up the good sportsmanship in this whole scenario. And I think that's a lesson that we can all kind of use in different parts of our lives. So anyway, everyone, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us here on the show. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Don't forget, you can check us out at osipfoundation.org. If you'd like to contact the show, use the email address podcast@osipfoundation.org. We're at facebook.com/osipfoundation, X and Instagram @osipfoundation, hashtag how you play the game. We'll talk to everyone in just a couple of weeks, and until then, treat each other with respect. How You Play the Game is a production of the OSIP Foundation, Incorporated. The producer-engineer of this episode is Sean Ryan. Music by Soundspring Studio. The executive producer of How You Play the Game is Jack Furlong. For more information, visit osipfoundation.org.